Abeni Tolliver knew the board meeting would be ugly before she got both feet on the bedroom floor. At 6:42 a.m., Faith Leland called from Vellum Rowe's flagship rehearsal. 3 different people had given 3 different answers about the same service sequence. "Who owns the decision?" Abeni asked. Faith hesitated. "That's why I'm calling you." Abeni nearly answered from habit. She had designed the sequence. She knew exactly what the staff should do. Instead, she asked again, "Who owns it?" Faith admitted part belonged to Vellum Rowe and part to Lantern 9 Experience Studio. They had built the interface together months earlier. "Then don't turn joint work into my personal permission slip," Abeni said. "I'll see you at the meeting." In the kitchen, Miles Velland had left her favorite savory pastry beside her briefing notebook. He was already dressed in charcoal trousers, his brown hair silvering at the temples. "You forgot breakfast yesterday," he said. "You remembered. I still remember things." The affair with Adele Quaid was no longer a suspicion, but the board had not been called to decide adultery. It had been called because Vellum Rowe's flagship launch was slipping into contradictory authority. Miles said Gerald Holt wanted the meeting kept operational. "So do I," Abeni said. "You stopped keeping operational and personal separate when you gave Adele authority over work that touched mine." Miles insisted Adele had launch authority, not control of Lantern 9. Then somebody should have defined where one stopped and the other started. Abeni put the pastry in her bag. Before Vellum Rowe became an international luxury retailer, she and Miles had walked new stores together with handwritten routing cards, asking each other, "What did you see first?" Once, the phrase had meant mutual respect. Lately, it had meant "tell me what I missed." "Fix it before anyone else notices." Miles almost asked the old question. Abeni saw it in his face. "Don't," she said and left. At headquarters, Faith met her outside the boardroom. Adele was already there in a forest green suit, chestnut hair neat at her shoulders, carrying rehearsal notes instead of looking like anyone's fantasy. That irritated Abeni in its own way. Adele looked competent. "Whatever else is true," Abeni told her, "you're here because you have a role. Speak to that role." "I intend to." Gerald opened the special meeting at 9. 6 of 7 directors were present, including Miles and Patricia Velland. Gerald stated the jurisdiction plainly: launch risk, delegated authority, executive accountability. This board cannot decide a marriage, an affair, forgiveness, or private moral standing. Faith summarized the operational conflict. Adele described the authority Miles had given her as interim launch director. Abeni described Lantern 9's contract. Then Gerald asked about the late service rehearsal change. Abeni admitted she had changed the sequence Tuesday afternoon because the shortened version removed a customer recovery step her team had already trained. She had notified her own leads and Faith's team. She had not called Adele directly. "Why not?" Gerald asked. "Because the change affected my contracted work. I believe Miles was responsible for communicating the executive authority implication." Gerald nodded. "So the late change is real." "Yes. And the communication gap is real." Abeni held his gaze. "Yes." No one rushed to save her from that answer. Gerald had also circulated a 2-page operating packet the night before, but it contained no mystery document waiting to rescue anyone. It showed only what everyone already knew in fragments: current roles, launch deadlines, and where the temporary reporting lines had begun to overlap. Abeni had read it twice and still could not answer the question that mattered most to her. Was Miles defending Adele because he believed the launch structure was defensible, because he wanted to protect the woman he was sleeping with, or because admitting the structure was flawed would expose how much invisible work Abeni had done for years? No chart could prove that. Across the table, Patricia read with a pencil in hand. Adele had marked several operational pages. Faith checked the time because she needed to be back at the flagship before noon. Everyone had a reason to be there that existed outside Abeni's marriage, which made the room more credible and more painful. Gerald asked them to stay with observable decisions. Abeni agreed. She wanted truth badly enough not to manufacture certainty. Miles spoke next. "Adele acted with an authority I gave her. She didn't invent the interim launch role, and she shouldn't be treated as though she exceeded it simply because the personal situation is unacceptable. The harm landed precisely because he was telling part of the truth. Gerald asked whether Adele's authority included unilateral decisions affecting Lantern 9. Miles said no. Then where was the interface supposed to occur? Between launch leadership and Lantern 9. Abeni turned toward him. Which person owned that interface? Miles could not name one. Patricia entered the discussion calmly. She had encouraged Adele not to wait for permission on every minor launch decision because the opening could not stall whenever uncertainty appeared. And Abeni changed a critical rehearsal sequence late. Without speaking directly to the woman running the launch, Patricia said, "Both things can be true." Gerald then asked Adele what she had understood before Tuesday. Adele did not look at Miles for help. She said she believed Abeni was gradually stepping back from direct launch decisions and that Miles had authority to define the transition. "Did Abeni tell you that herself?" Gerald asked. "No, did you ask her?" Adele paused. "Not directly." Abeni watched that answer settle without triumph. Adele had not forged authority. She had accepted an interpretation that benefited her without checking with the person most affected by it. Gerald asked whether that changed Adele's view of her own responsibility. "It changes what I should have verified," Adele said. "It does not make the authority imaginary." Patricia agreed with that distinction. Abeni did too, though she disliked doing so. Abeni felt the accusation more sharply because Patricia was not inventing her mistake. "I communicated badly," Abeni said. "That does not make me responsible for an authority structure I did not create." Miles said nobody was claiming that, then did exactly what she feared. He told the board Abeni knew how fragile the launch was, knew the late change would affect Adele's team, and could have prevented confusion by calling her directly. Patricia added that Abeni had prevented similar confusion before. History became obligation in one sentence. Abeni looked at Miles. "So you expected me to make your overlapping instructions workable. I expected you to coordinate a problem you knew existed. Because I knew how." Gerald cut in before the argument could expand. Neither Miles nor Patricia, he established, was claiming Lantern 9 had a contractual duty to reconcile Vellum Rowe's executive directions. He also refused to erase Abeni's communication lapse. "This meeting is not producing a clean hero and villain," he said. "Good," Abeni replied. "I didn't come for one." She closed the temporary authority map. "Lantern 9 will fulfill every contractual obligation. We will also honor every pre-existing joint commitment we deliberately entered with Vellum Rowe. But effective now, my staff will not make internal Vellum Rowe decisions simply because I can solve them faster. Every new internal issue needs a named Vellum Rowe owner before Lantern 9 acts. We will classify active joint matters over the next 48 hours. Gerald asked whether she meant it immediately. Yes. It was the first decision that could not be taken back without making her words meaningless. Miles surprised her. "That's reasonable." She looked at him. "Don't agree with me like this is what you wanted." "It isn't. Is still reasonable." He named Faith as the temporary internal cross-functional owner and told his executives nobody was to pressure Lantern 9 employees beyond contract. Patricia did not applaud. Adele did not retreat. The board moved to its limited decisions, temporary reporting lines, whether the launch could remain on schedule, and what Miles needed to clarify afterward. There was no vote on the marriage and no declaration that Abeni had. Been right all along. After adjournment, Faith stopped Abeni in the corridor. "I need you at the flagship at 1. If it's a Vellum Rowe decision, you don't." Faith turned her tablet around. The final service rehearsal was highlighted. "This one isn't. We designed it jointly before Adele had this role. Lantern 9 owns the service standard. We own staffing. Adele is the current Vellum Rowe counterpart." Abeni stared at the screen, then at Adele across the corridor. Her new boundary had not created distance from the Mistress. It had created a legitimate reason to work directly beside her. Faith lowered her voice. "You promised the frontline team you would finish this rehearsal." Abeni remembered. She had made that promise before the affair became public between them. Adele approached. "I can live with uncomfortable," she said. Abeni answered. "Then 1 o'clock. We finished the commitment. Nothing else." The board's actual decision stayed narrow. Gerald proposed a temporary 30-day authority map, a named escalation path, and a follow-up for Miles on permanent delegation after the launch. One director favored preserving the opening date. Another worried that rushing would create more service failures. Nobody announced that Abeni was innocent. Nobody demanded Adele be fired, and Patricia did not suddenly turn against her son. Faith checked her watch twice because she had a rehearsal floor waiting. Adele asked whether existing joint commitments would be grandfathered into the temporary map. Abeni answered before Gerald could. If we deliberately promised them, yes. If people merely got used to me solving them, no. That distinction cost her something immediately. Lantern 9 would spend transition hours it could not fully bill, and Abeni would have to move another client review. She accepted that cost because the alternative was abandoning work she had knowingly promised. Miles heard the difference too. His expression told her he understood that her boundary was not revenge. Whether he understood what it meant for their marriage remained unanswered. The flagship smelled of new wood, fabric, and floor cleaner when Abeni arrived in flats, a blister bandage already rubbing against one heel. Faith had 40 minutes before the first full rehearsal. She separated the work cleanly. Lantern 9 owned service language and sequencing. Vellum Row owned staffing and escalation. Adele took her side of the table without Miles present. Their first disagreement came almost immediately. Two associates had been reassigned, and Adele wanted to cut a custom recovery demonstration to save time. Abeni refused. If we skip it now, you open with staff who have only practiced half the recovery. If we keep it, we lose 20 minutes. Then lose 20. Faith asked for the smallest version that preserved the standard. Abeni proposed dropping a second welcome sequence instead. Adele checked the timing, challenged one detail, then accepted the adjustment and gave the order. Later, a floor manager suggested removing another Abeni design step. Before Abeni could defend it, Adele said, "No, that stays. Without it, the handoff feels like abandonment." Keeping the step made Adele's launch harder. Miles was not there to see it. Abeni hated how much that mattered. During a break, Adele stood several feet from her rather than claiming intimacy. "You want to ask why I kept it," she said. "I know why. It's good design." "Exactly. Competence does not absolve you." "I didn't say it did." Abeni asked whether Adele had noticed her absence from important discussions. Adele admitted she had. "Did you ask why?" "Not enough." "Because—" Adele looked toward the rehearsal floor. "Because the answer might have narrowed my role. And because Miles made the arrangement convenient." It was not innocence. It was also not a confession designed to crown Abeni correct. "You knew there was a wife," Abeni said. "Yes." "You knew there was business overlap." "Yes." "Then own that too." Edo. Faith called them back before either woman could turn honesty into reconciliation. The rehearsal ran long, but it worked. When an associate brought Abeni an internal scheduling problem, she pointed toward Faith. "She owns that," the associate said. "You usually know. Knowing is not the same as owning." Faith answered the question. Afterwards, she told Abeni, "You could have answered faster." "I know, and I'm glad you didn't." Abeni checked her phone. A household service company had shifted the appointment to repair a sagging kitchen cabinet hinge. The message automatically asked her to reschedule. For years, she would have handled it without noticing she had done so. She forwarded it to Miles, "Your appointment." His reply came quickly. "I'll handle it. Nothing else." Adele walked past with a stack of routing cards. "I'm staying in the launch role," she said. "Working beside you being uncomfortable doesn't make the authority unreal." Abeni studied her. "Then own it without borrowing Miles." "That's what I intend to do." Driving back to Lantern 9, Abeni realized the day had refused every clean category. Adele could be capable and still responsible for accepting a convenient ambiguity. Miles could respect one boundary and still be the man who had blamed his wife before the board. Patricia could be wrong about Abeni's responsibility and right about her late communication. At her office, Abeni's project lead asked whether Lantern 9 was leaving Vellum Row. "We finished what we deliberately promised," Abeni said. "We stopped doing what people merely became used to us doing." "And after launch?" Abeni hated the answer. I don't know yet. The cost did not stay abstract. Abeni's project lead texted that the rescheduled client review had forced 2 Lantern 9 employees to shift childcare pickups, and Abeni approved overtime rather than pretending the disruption belonged to someone else. She hated that her boundary could be justified and still inconvenience people who had done nothing wrong. At the flagship, one junior associate quietly asked whether Lantern 9 was pulling out because of the family situation. Abeni corrected that without giving the young woman private details. We are finishing our work. Reporting lines are changing. Your job is not to manage anyone's marriage. The associate visibly relaxed. Adele heard the exchange and did not add a word. Later, when Faith asked Abeni to approve the final sequence, Abeni forced herself to say, "Show me only the part Lantern 9 owns." Faith did. The remaining decision went to Adele. Abeni disliked Adele's answer, but let it stand. The rehearsal did not become a contest over who was smarter. It became the first proof, through ordinary work rather than documents, that clarified authority could produce disagreement without collapse. Patricia called the next morning while Abeni stood in the kitchen spreading almond butter on toast. "Miles wants to preserve Friday's opening," she said. "Faith says they can compress tomorrow's training." Abeni stopped. "Why are you asking me?" Patricia fell silent. "Because you designed the standard." "Then ask the question that belongs to me." Patricia corrected herself. "Would compressed training compromise the service standard?" "Yes. Enough that I would not sign my name to it." "Thank you." Patricia still did not hang up. "I continue to think you should have called Adele directly Tuesday." "I know, but I should not have encouraged Adele to move operationally without checking where my own authority stopped." The admission was smaller than an apology and more useful than one. "No," Abeni said. "You shouldn't have." Patricia called Miles next, not to join Abeni's side, but to protect the brand standard she cared about. By 10, the opening had moved 48 hours. Miles disliked the delay. Patricia insisted that preserving a legacy opening date mattered less than opening with a standard the company could defend. Faith confirmed the training risk, and Miles accepted the change. That evening, he and Abeni ate takeout at the dining table. No board packets sat between them. Halfway through dinner, Miles said, "I was wrong to use your communication mistake the way I did." Abeni put down her fork. "Which part?" "I knew the authority structure was unclear. I also knew you had fixed unclear things before. I used that history to make your decision look more responsible for the problem than it was." "Why?" "Because saying the structure was mine meant admitting I gave Adele room I had not explained to you. And because I didn't want the board hearing how often I relied on you to make difficult choices easier to execute." Abeni waited. "That still isn't the whole problem," she said. "No. Sometimes you were willing. Sometimes you wanted to be the person who could solve it. I let willingness become availability, then availability become expectation." The distinction hurt because she recognized herself inside it. Miles told her he had ended the affair with Adele that afternoon. Abeni felt no victory. "Did you remove her from the launch?" "No, ending a personal relationship does not make her incompetent. Firing her now would turn her job into a tool for cleaning up my marriage." Abeni hated how reasonable that was. "Does she want to stay?" "Yes." "Then let her finish." Miles nodded. Abeni said Lantern 9 would still leave Vellum Row after the transition. His face changed. "I assumed you might." "Don't assume. I'm telling you." "Then I hate it." "Better. But I accept it." That was the first hopeful thing he said all evening, because accepting the professional loss gave him nothing in return. He did not ask whether she would stay married. He did not use ending the affair as payment. When dinner ended, he carried his plate to the sink and left the unanswered relationship question where it was. The delay had ordinary consequences. Vendors charged rescheduling fees. 2 senior staff members had to rearrange travel. Faith spent most of the morning explaining the revised timetable rather than preparing the floor. Patricia did not pretend those costs were trivial. She simply believed the brand standard was worth paying them. That mattered to Abeni because it was a choice Patricia made for her own reason, not a gesture toward reconciliation. At home, the shifted cabinet repair appointment buzzed on Miles's phone while they ate. He glanced at it and put the phone face down. I moved it to Saturday, he said. Abeni had not reminded him. Thank you. Miles looked almost surprised by the word. You don't have to thank me for handling my appointment. I know. The exchange was small enough to be real. When Abeni later went upstairs, she noticed the guest room light under the door. Miles had not followed her to demand an answer after his apology. She was grateful and angry at the same time. The fact that he could finally respect space did not erase the fact that he had helped make that space necessary. The delayed opening gave everyone more time, but it also exposed Abeni's own defensive logic. During the final integrated rehearsal, Adele moved a routing card from Abeni's side of the table to her own. That decision is vellum rose. It affects Lantern 9. Yes, but it is still mine. Abeni could see a faster answer. She could also see Adele was right about ownership. Then make it. Adele chose differently from Abeni. The choice worked. Later, Faith caught Abeni quietly reorganizing the routing board after everyone else had left for lunch. Those aren't yours, Faith said. I'm not changing decisions. I'm making the board easier to read. Because you can. Abeni set down the card. Faith leaned against the table. You know your problem isn't only that people rely on you. Please don't psychoanalyze me beside laminated signs. You also get nervous when you have to rely on anybody else. That irritated Abeni enough to sound true. She had spent years making herself the person least likely to be disappointed because she needed the least from anyone. After Miles's betrayal, even healthy interdependence had begun to feel contaminated. The midpoint of the problem was not that every overlap had been exploitation. Some of the work she and Vellum Rowe built together had been genuinely shared, freely chosen, and good. Miles had later corrupted the consent around that sharing. That did not make all dependence a trap. That afternoon, across town for another Lantern 9 client, the heel of Abeni's shoe snapped in a lobby. She changed into emergency flats and finished the presentation. In the parking garage, Miles texted to ask how it went. She told him the truth. Successful. Broke a heel. Instead of arranging a replacement without asking, he wrote, "Need me to do anything?" Abeni stared at the question. The old reflex was to say no. The newer fear was that saying yes would reopen every door she had just closed. She typed, "Can you pick up the repaired pair from Marco's tomorrow? I have back-to-back calls." Miles replied, "Yes." "What time?" "No celebration." No claim on her evening. The next morning, the repaired shoes were boxed by the front door with the receipt on top. At the flagship later, Patricia arrived for a brand review and visibly disliked one staging decision. Instead of correcting it, she asked Faith, "Is this yours?" Faith said yes. "Then I'll ask about the outcome after opening." Patricia was learning to stop using informal influence as authority. She remained unconvinced that Abeni had handled Tuesday well. Adele remained in her role. Miles remained married to Abeni, but outside her professional work. No one had switched teams. That night, Abeni admitted to herself that two outcomes still frightened her equally: leaving a man she still loved after he had begun changing, or staying long enough to discover whether the change could survive ordinary life. Faith did not let Abeni turn self-knowledge into self-blame. You solving things is not equivalent to Miles using that habit against you, she said. Different responsibilities. Abeni knew that, but she also knew she had liked being the person nobody could surprise. Competence had protected her long before Miles betrayed her. Her mother had raised her to arrive prepared, notice what other people missed, and never hand someone an easy reason to dismiss her. That history made her skill real, not pathological. The problem was what happened when skill became identity and identity became obligation. At the flagship, Adele demonstrated the opposite risk. She refused to give up legitimate authority merely to appear remorseful. "If I resign because my private choices are exposed," she told Faith, "everyone will decide the job was never mine." Faith answered, "Then prove it through the work, not through Miles." Adele accepted that. Abeni overheard only the last sentence and kept walking. She did not need to supervise Adele's growth. Her harder task was learning that depending on someone by choice could still be compatible with dignity. Opening day arrived 2 days late and without catastrophe. Staff made mistakes, customers complained about small things, and the systems mostly held. Faith answered operating questions without calling Abeni unless Lantern 9 truly owned part of the answer. Adele led the launch. Patricia stayed out of day-to-day direction. Miles handled executive problems without using his wife as a hidden operating layer. Near noon, a service associate froze during a difficult customer recovery. Abeni saw it from across the floor and took 2 steps toward her before stopping. The associate looked to Faith. Faith directed the floor lead, and the situation recovered. Abeni did not feel unnecessary. She felt unclaimed. Adele came to stand nearby. That was hard for you. You're getting bold. I'm getting honest. Adele said she intended to stay through the launch cycle and discuss any permanent role through the clarified structure, not through Miles privately. Then she told Abeni the affair was over from her side too. I didn't end it because he chose you, Adele said. I ended it because I kept saying my authority was professional while accepting private access that made the two impossible to separate. You think that makes us even? No, it makes my next decision mine. Abeni understood that much. Adele was not expelled, humiliated, or exposed as incompetent. She would carry the ambiguity of having done good work in a role forever associated with the affair. That was a proportionate consequence no board could erase. The first day closed with problems, but no crisis. Gerald received an ordinary operating note. No one called a victory meeting. At home after 8, Miles found Abeni in socks and an old college sweatshirt. He asked whether she wanted him to make dinner. Can you? She said. Eggs. That's breakfast. It's protein. He cracked eggs into a pan and immediately set the heat too high. Abeni told him to lower it. He did, then stopped before asking anything else. They ate late at the kitchen island. Miles said, I know Lantern 9 is leaving. Yes, I hate that. I know. I'm not asking you to change it. Good. He hesitated. What I don't know is whether you're leaving me too. Abeni looked at him. The ending branch was still alive in both directions. Neither do I. Pain crossed his face. Can you live with that tonight? She asked. Miles nodded. Yes. He slept in the guest room because he chose to give her space. Abeni did not call him back. She also did not lock the bedroom door. The next morning they spoke about coffee and schedules before anything emotional. That ordinariness frightened her more than another fight would have. It suggested a repaired marriage might be possible, which meant leaving would carry a different kind of loss than escaping an unchanged man. The launch also refused to punish anyone neatly. One of Adele's staffing decisions produced a 15-minute bottleneck, but she corrected it without blaming Abeni. One of Abeni's service assumptions proved too complicated for new associates, and she simplified it without pretending the original design was sacred. Faith made the best call of the afternoon on an issue neither woman had anticipated. Miles spent an hour dealing with a supplier problem that had nothing to do with the affair and did not mention it at home until Abeni asked about his day. Patricia left before closing because she had another commitment rather than remaining to preside over a symbolic family reckoning. The company behaved like a company. That was exactly what prevented the board conflict from becoming a slow-motion vindication ceremony. At home, Abeni noticed Miles had moved his overnight things into the guest room without taking half the primary closet or staging a departure. Their ordinary life had changed, but not into a dramatic separation tableau. The practical uncertainty matched the emotional one. 2 rooms, 1 household, 1 marriage still waiting for a decision. Lantern 9's final transition week hurt for reasons betrayal could not explain. Vellum Row had been woven through almost half of Abeni's professional life. She had designed service rituals in the earliest stores, argued with Patricia about standards, and watched Faith grow into an operations director who no longer needed Abeni to answer first. In the flagship staff room, Faith peeled Lantern 9's name from the permanent escalation chart. You sure? Yes. I hate this. Me too. They replaced it with Faith's operating team. The system changed without pretending the old collaboration had been worthless. Later, Miles asked Abeni to meet at a quiet cafe instead of his office or their home. He told her he had discussed operating oversight with Gerald. Don't resign from me, she said immediately. I'm not. I realized I keep thinking the largest sacrifice is automatically the most convincing one. Good realization. You don't need me powerless. You need me responsible. He said Adele would finish the launch cycle under clarified reporting and that her permanent professional future would be handled through ordinary company authority. Then he told Abeni what he wanted personally. I want you to stay married to me. That's a declared want. Fine. I want a marriage where you do not have to be useful to feel safe with me, and where I don't treat your willingness to help as permanent access. Abeni looked through the window. I'm starting to treat needing anyone like danger. Miles did not seize the admission. Does that mean no? Do not turn one honest sentence into an answer. He stopped. Abeni continued. But it means there is still something here I care enough to examine. Miles accepted that without asking for a timeline. That night, Abeni found an old routing card in a kitchen drawer from one of Vellum Rowe's early openings. On the back, Miles had written, "What did you see first?" Under it, years younger Abeni had written, "You missed the chairs." She laughed, then cried quietly beside the silverware drawer. The good years had not become fake, because later years had become damaging. That truth kept both climax choices alive. She could leave and protect the self she had rebuilt, losing a man she still loved and memories that were genuinely good. Or she could try a new marriage with a man who had finally begun changing before he knew whether change would earn him anything. Neither option restored the old professional partnership. That loss was already permanent. At the cafe, Miles did not ask Abeni to grade his progress. He told her he had started sending questions through normal executive channels rather than forwarding them to her out of habit. "You want credit for email discipline?" she asked. "No, I want you to know I understand the boundary. Those are different things. I'm learning." She believed that he was learning. She did not yet know whether learning was enough. Before she left, Miles asked whether he could still call her about ordinary household matters. "Of course. And if I don't know whether something is ordinary," Abeni considered the question. "Ask whether I want to talk about it. Don't decide that because we're married, every door is open." He nodded. That night, after finding the old routing card, Abeni left it on the kitchen counter instead of hiding it or throwing it away. Miles saw it the next morning and touched only the edge. "You found this." "I did. Do you want to talk about it?" "Not yet." He left it there. The restraint made the memory safer than an apology would have. Lantern 9 completed the handoff in its own conference room, not before the board. Faith came as the receiving operating owner. They reviewed responsibilities, corrected 2 small mistakes, and signed. No dramatic witness was needed. "That's it," Faith said. "That's it." At the door, Faith turned back. "I never thought you were trying to make me smaller." "I know. Sometimes you still did." Abeni nodded. "I know that too." When Faith left, Abeni sat alone for 1 minute and let the professional ending have weight. Patricia texted, "I heard the handoff is complete. Thank you for finishing what you promised." Abeni replied, "You're welcome." Patricia answered, "I won't ask what happens next." That was its own independent correction. At home, the kitchen cabinet door sagged because the hinge repair company had canceled again. Miles said he would reschedule. "Your appointment," Abeni reminded him. "I know. I wasn't testing you. I was telling you I know." They sat at the kitchen table. Abeni finally separated the 2 decisions that had been tangled all story. "Professionally, I'm done. Lantern 9 is out. I understand. Personally, I have 2 honest choices. I leave. We divide the house and the life. And you keep changing because you need to, not because it gets me back." Miles went pale, but stayed quiet. "I stay, and we try something I do not know how to do yet. A marriage where I can help without becoming responsible for you, and you can help without taking over. Where asking is normal." Miles said, "I want the second." "I know. I'm deciding what I want." She thought about the boardroom, about him turning her competence into blame. That damage would remain. She thought about Adele choosing professional legitimacy without demanding forgiveness, Patricia accepting a costly launch delay, Faith owning her role, and Miles picking up her shoes only because Abeni had asked. "I want to try," Abeni said. Miles closed his eyes for half a second. "Do not celebrate too hard. I'm trying not to move." She set the conditions plainly. Vellum Rowe received no informal access to Lantern 9. The affair ending was a minimum, not proof. When Miles wanted help, he asked. When she said no, he survived it. When Abeni needed help, she would practice asking instead of resenting him for failing to read her mind. Patricia would not use Abeni to manage Miles. Adele's professional future would not become a marriage test. And I'm not promising forever tonight, Abeni said. I understand. Do you? No, but I accept it. She almost smiled. The professional separation was permanent. The marriage was not restored. It was deliberately given another chance through observable practice. As they went upstairs, Miles stopped between the primary bedroom and guest room. Where do you want me? Abeni answered, not in our room yet, but you don't have to close the guest room door. That night the hallway light stayed on between them. It was not reconciliation completed. It was reconciliation chosen. Miles asked one question before accepting her conditions. If I fail at this once, does trying end? Abeni answered carefully. If you make a mistake, we deal with the mistake. If you turn the mistake into permission to restore the old pattern, then yes, this ends. Fair. No, not fair. Necessary. He accepted the correction. Abeni also named her own obligation. She could not keep saying yes, then privately converting her resentment into evidence that he should have known she meant no. If she chose to help, she would own the yes. If she did not want to help, she would say no before anger did the speaking for her. That was the costly side of reconciliation for her. It removed the safety of being silently indispensable and silently wronged. Miles could no longer assume access. Abeni could no longer rely on unspoken boundaries. Neither promise guaranteed success. When she told him he could leave the guest room door open, asked, "Do you want the hallway light on?" "Yes." "Okay." He switched it on and did not step toward her. The small obedience carried more hope than a grand declaration because it required him to tolerate closeness without claiming it. Saturday morning felt almost offensively ordinary. Abeni wore jeans and flat sandals while Miles searched the kitchen for the broken cabinet hinge and finally found it in the bowl where he kept his keys. "Executive excellence," Abeni said. "I run a multinational company. You lost hardware in a fruit bowl. Both facts can exist." They drove themselves to a neighborhood hardware store. No board members, no staff, no one who cared what Vellum Row was worth. In the hinge aisle, Miles held the old piece against rows of packages. "Which size?" he asked. Abeni knew immediately. She could feel the answer waiting in her mouth. Miles stopped himself. "No, hold on." He checked the screw spacing, compared two packages, and chose the 3.5-inch hinge. "Right." Abeni raised an eyebrow. "Do you need verification?" Miles looked at the old hinge again. "No, I have it." He put the package into the cart. Then he held up two finishes. "Brushed nickel or matte black?" "Nickel matches." "That isn't what I asked." Abeni looked at him. "Which one do you want?" For years, preference had come after optimization. What worked fastest? What caused the least disruption? What solved the problem? Abeni picked up the matte black hinge. "This one, it won't match the others." "I know. Maybe we change them later." "Okay." In the next aisle, she reached for a heavier repair package, then stopped. Asking embarrassed her more than lifting it. "Miles." "Yeah. Carry this." He did not make the moment ceremonial. "Sure." He took the box. She carried the hinge. Walking toward the register, Abeni's phone buzzed. Faith had sent a photo of the flagship's morning routing board with one line beneath it. "We survived without you." "Rude." Abeni laughed. Miles asked, "Everything okay?" "Yes." He waited rather than asking to see. She slipped the phone back into her pocket. Outside, Miles put the heavier package in the trunk. Abeni held the black hinge in her palm. The kitchen would look slightly different. Not ruined. Not restored. Changed by choice. "Coffee?" Miles asked. "Yes." "Same place." Abeni looked down the block. "No. There's 1-2 blocks over I've wanted to try." Miles nodded. "Lead the way." She started walking, then glanced back. "You're carrying the bag." "I noticed." "Good." He followed. Abeni was not proving she needed nobody. She was learning that dependence chosen freely was different from access assumed without permission. Miles was learning that helping did not mean taking over and that love did not entitle him to her competence. They crossed the street together, carrying different parts of the same small repair, and neither mistook following for surrender. At the register, Miles paid for the hardware because the cabinet repair was his appointment, then handed Abeni the receipt without assuming she wanted him to keep track of the household file. "Do you want this?" he asked. "Put in the kitchen drawer when we get home." "Got it." Outside, she asked him to carry the heavier package, and he simply did. The request mattered because she could have carried it herself. Dependence was no longer proof of incapacity. It was a choice about how two adults shared a morning. On the walk to the new coffee shop, Miles did not ask what Faith's message said after Abeni put away her phone. Abeni, after several steps, chose to tell him anyway. "The flagship is fine. Faith is being rude about surviving without me." Miles laughed. "Good for Faith." Abeni smiled. There was grief underneath it. The old vellum row partnership was gone, and the certainty she once had about Miles would never return. The hope was smaller and therefore more believable. They might build a marriage where help was requested, preference mattered, and love did not function as an automatic authorization code. This story is a fictional narrative created for entertainment, reflection, and educational purposes. Any resemblance to real people, places, or events is purely coincidental.